The piercing shriek of the ambulance siren, usually a sound that twisted a knot of anxiety with the faint hope of aid, was now a beacon of pure agonizing frustration. It was so close, just beyond the ornate, ridiculously imposing wrought iron gates of the Serene Pines. Luxury estates, yet it might as well have been on another desolate planet. Dr. Alex Ryder slammed a bloodless fist against the unyielding metal bars, the impact jarring up his arm. His voice, when it came, was raw cracking, with a desperation that clawed at his throat like broken glass. "Open the gate. For God's sake, open it. My daughter. Lily. She's dying." Inside the small, incongruously turreted gatehouse, a structure that looked more like a medieval folly than a security post, Deirdre Macmillan, resplendent in a crisply pressed uniform that seemed 3 sizes too severe for her, peered out through the thick reinforced glass. Her expression was a carefully constructed mask of suspicion, underlaid with a stubborn, almost fearful adherence to protocol. She clutched a laminated copy of the Serene Pines Homeowners Association Covenants and Restrictions, like a zealot holding a sacred text, its dog-eared pages testament to its frequent unyielding citation. "Sir," she began, her voice amplified by a small tinny speaker, managing to sound both condescending and nervous. "As I have explained multiple times now, this vehicle does not possess the approved Serene Pines resident or pre-authorized guest transponder. I cannot under any circumstances allow entry without direct confirmation from the HOA management office. And as you know, they are closed for the evening. It's past 7 p.m. She stopped breathing. Alex roared, the sound ripped from his very core. His eyes, wild and bloodshot, darted back towards his sprawling architect-designed home, a home he now loathed for its distance from this accursed gate. Inside, his 8-year-old daughter, Lily, had collapsed mere minutes ago, engulfed by a catastrophic asthma attack. Her emergency inhaler, usually a swift bringer of relief, had proven utterly useless against the vicious, rapid constriction of her airways. His wife, Clara, a registered nurse, whose skills he'd always admired with a quiet pride, was performing CPR, her face a pale, sweat-slicked mask of terror. He could almost feel her frantic, rhythmic compressions through the ground. But Lily needed more. She needed advanced airway management epinephrine, a cocktail of drugs and procedures only the paramedics in that stalled ambulance, mere yards away, could provide. "This is the confirmation. It's a goddamn ambulance. Are you out of your mind? It's a child." Deirdre visibly recoiled at his language, a slight purse of her lips. "Language, sir, is not necessary, and rules are rules. They are in place for the safety and security of all our esteemed residents. Unvetted vehicles, regardless of their purported purpose, pose a potential risk. There have been incidents." She tapped a perfectly manicured, blood-red nail on the glass, a nervous tick she likely wasn't even aware of. "I have my instructions. My supervisor, Mr. Abernathy, is very clear on the enforcement of access protocols. I could lose my position if I deviate." The paramedics, 2 young individuals whose stressed, weary faces belied their years, were out of their vehicle now, their heavy jump kits already in hand, their expressions shifting from bewilderment to a rapidly simmering anger. The taller one, whose name tag read Chen, stepped forward. "Ma'am, this is a medical emergency of the highest order, a pediatric respiratory arrest, likely progressing to cardiac. We need access now. Every single second, is critical for brain function for survival." Deirdre's gaze flickered towards them, then back to Alex, a hint of something, perhaps fear, perhaps just deeper entrenchment, hardening her eyes. "I understand your agitation. However, protocol is protocol. Perhaps if you had contacted the approved Serene Pines private security ambulance service." A surge of white-hot, murderous rage, so potent it nearly buckled Alex's knees, washed over him. The approved service. He'd fought that damned exclusive contract for 3 long years, a lone-weary voice in interminable HOA meetings, otherwise dominated by mind-numbing discussions about the precise shade of beige for window shutters, the approved height for petunia beds, and the scandalous impropriety of visible garden gnomes. That private service was notoriously slower, often less equipped for complex pediatric emergencies like this, and their response times were a running joke amongst local EMS. "There isn't time," he choked out the words, tasting like ash and bile in his mouth. He saw Clara's silhouette appear briefly in the brightly lit doorway of their home, her hand waving in a gesture of pure, unadulterated despair before she vanished back inside. Lily. His bright, giggling Lily, who loved chasing butterflies in their meticulously landscaped, HOA-compliant, of course, garden, was fading. The image of her small, ethereal face, already tinged with blue when he'd left her side to confront the gate, burned into his retinas. He had built this life, this gilded cage in Serene Pines, for its supposed safety, its acclaimed schools, its glossy brochure, promise of tranquility. It was meant to be an oasis after years spent navigating the chaotic, adrenaline-fueled world of battlefield medicine in war-torn countries, and then as the founder and chief pilot of Aeromed Rescue, his own private air ambulance service specializing in high-risk critical care transport. He still flew missions himself, sometimes thriving on the razor-edge precision, the immense stakes, the satisfaction of snatching lives back from the brink. He'd always prided himself on his ability to compartmentalize, to leave the intensity of that world behind when he crossed the threshold of his home, back to his family, back to Lily's infectious laughter. Now, the suffocating bureaucratic idiocy of his chosen sanctuary, this haven of petty rules, was poised to destroy the very reason he'd sought it, his family's well-being. Everything. The past few years in Serene Pines had been an ongoing, exhausting exercise in navigating a minefield of petty regulations. There was the infamous incident of the unapproved basketball hoop, which had resulted in a formal 3-page warning letter. Then, the passive-aggressive note about their excessively vibrant welcome mat. It was a cheerful sunflower yellow. Most galling had been the formal complaint lodged by Mrs. Abernathy herself, wife of the HOA president Harold Abernathy, when Lily's unrestrained, joyous laughter during an impromptu garden tea party with her dolls was deemed disruptive to the serene atmosphere of Mrs. Abernathy's prize-winning, meticulously cultivated rose garden, which bordered their property. Each petty slight, each absurd injunction had been met with Alex's polite but firm pushback, a weary resignation to the sheer, unadulterated absurdity of it all. He'd learned to choose his battles, mostly delegating the soul-crushing HOA correspondence to Clara, determined to preserve his finite energy for his demanding work and his precious fleeting family time. "It's just noise, Alex," Clara would say, trying to soothe him. "Don't let them get to you." But it did get to him, this slow, insidious chipping away at common sense. Lily's asthma had always been a shadow, lurking at the periphery of their otherwise sunny lives. It was managed meticulously with a regimen of medications, regular checkups, and constant vigilance. They had a detailed emergency plan, practiced drills, knew the fastest route to the hospital by heart. But this attack, it had been different, an explosive, terrifying escalation that had overwhelmed her tiny body in terrifyingly few moments. He'd dialed 911, his voice preternaturally calm as he relayed the vital information, the years of medical training kicking in, overriding the screaming panic of the father. Help was on its way, or so he had naively thought. Now, watching Deirdre Macmillan's implacable, rule-bound face, framed by the turreted absurdity of the gatehouse, something cold and hard snapped deep within Alex's mind. The carefully constructed dam of civilized restraint of polite frustration shattered. It was replaced by the ice-cold focus of a man who operated routinely in life-or-death scenarios, a man who understood with chilling clarity that when seconds were the only currency that mattered, obstacles weren't to be negotiated with. They were to be obliterated. If the ground route was blocked by an intractable fool and a book of idiotic rules, he'd take to the air. His air, his hand shaking slightly, not from fear, but from a surfeit of adrenaline, went to the rugged satellite phone clipped to his belt. His fingers, surprisingly steady, were already punching in a familiar pre-programmed number. The taller paramedic, Chen, looked at him, a silent, desperate question in his eyes. Alex met his gaze, his own now burning with a terrifying, unshakable resolve. "They won't let you in," Alex stated, his voice, suddenly devoid of its earlier frantic pleading, now flat-hard and resonant with an authority that brooked no argument. "But I'm getting my daughter out." Wow. Deirdre watched, a smug little smile playing on her lips as Alex turned his back on the gate phone pressed to his ear. Probably calling his high-powered lawyer, she thought with a flicker of satisfaction. Let him. The rules were clear. Mr. Abernathy, the HOA president, had been exceptionally explicit, almost rabid, about unauthorized access after that unfortunate incident last spring when a non-resident catering van here for the Hendersons' anniversary party had inadvertently scuffed the pristine, newly sealed asphalt. The ensuing uproar had lasted weeks. Deirdre wasn't about to be the one responsible for another such transgression, especially not one involving an ambulance that wasn't their ambulance. Dispatch, this is Ryder. Alex spoke into the sat phone, his voice clipped, authoritative, the voice he used when commanding a complex rescue operation. I have a Code 1 pediatric emergency. Repeat, Code 1 pediatric. Location is Serene Pines Luxury Estates main gate. My GPS coordinates will follow. Local EMS is on scene, but access is denied by hostile private security. He paused, the next words catching in his throat. I need an immediate medevac. My primary bird, Angel 1, if available. Who's on pilot duty? A crackle on the line, then a familiar, calm voice. Mark's here, Alex. Just finished pre-flights. What's the situation? You sound bad. It's Lily, Alex said, and for a fleeting, agonizing moment, the iron control in his voice wavered, a tremor of raw pain escaping. Severe status asthmaticus, likely hypoxia. Clara's performing CPR. I need extraction now. Landing zone will be unconventional. I'll designate and send coordinates momentarily. Advise Mark to prep for a tight, potentially hazardous approach. Tell him visual confirmation will be critical. There was a beat of stunned silence on the other end. Then, unconventional Alex. How unconventional are we talking near your place? Alex's eyes flickered towards the Abernathy mansion, a sprawling edifice of beige stucco and faux Corinthian columns, its vast flood-lit lawn, dominated by the infamous award-winning Central Rose Garden. A garden tended with more care and expense than many of the community's children. A symbol, an idea began to form cold and clear. The LZ will be conspicuous. The objective is extraction and making a statement. Coordinates incoming. Tell Mark to activate the belly cam on approach and livestream direct to county EMS dispatch, and if he can, the local news affiliate's tip line. Let them all see why this is happening. ETA. Launching in 2, Alex. On site in approximately 5 to 7 minutes, depending on the headwind. Godspeed, Alex. For Lily. Make it 3. Alex bit out his gaze, fixed on the Abernathy property. He ended the call. An image flashed through his mind, his own perfectly manicured lawn. Large, yes, but bordered by trees, and his house. Risky. Then the Abernathy's grand, ostentatious rose garden. Large, open, and a perfect, deeply symbolic target. A part of him, the cold, calculating professional, registered it as the optimal landing zone. Another, more visceral part, felt a grim, vengeful satisfaction. He'd wrestled with the decision for a split second. The lawsuits, the FAA inquiries, the utter bedlam it would cause. Then he saw Lily's face again in his mind's eye, small and struggling, and the conflict vanished. There was no choice. He turned back to the gate, to Deirdre's still smug, though now slightly curious face, to the increasingly agitated paramedics, who were now arguing heatedly with the gatehouse speaker. Tell your superiors. Alex's voice was lethally soft, a silken whisper that carried more menace than any shout, that they have approximately 3 minutes to open this gate and allow these medical professionals access to save my daughter's life. If that gate is not open by the time my transport arrives, I will create my own access point. And trust me, his lips curled into a mirthless smile. The repair bill for that and the subsequent legal fallout will be significantly higher than any fine for an unregistered transponder or a scuffed piece of asphalt. Deirdre actually laughed a short, sharp, disbelieving bark. Threats, Dr. Ryder. That's not wise. I'm noting this insubordination in my incident report. She tapped her pen officiously on a clipboard. It's not a threat, Miss McMillan. Alex set his eyes like chips of glacial ice. It's a statement of unavoidable intent. He looked past her to the paramedics. Get ready. Things are about to get very loud and very busy. Inside the house, the sounds were muffled, but distinct to Alex's hyper-aware senses. Clara's ragged sobs, punctuated by her desperate counting of compressions. Alex, I'm losing her. I think I'm losing her. Oh God, Alex, please. Hold on, sweetheart, Alex yelled back. His voice strained his heart, a leaden weight threatening to drag him to his knees. Just a little longer. Help is coming. Real help. The next 2 minutes stretched into an agonizing, elastic eternity. Alex could hear it then, a distant rhythmic thumping, a sound as intimately familiar to him as his own heartbeat, the approaching rotors of his EC-145 call sign, Angel 1. Deirdre heard it too. Her smugness, so deeply entrenched moments before, began to visibly falter, a flicker of genuine unease, then alarm dawning in her eyes. She glanced up at the darkening sky, then back at Alex, a frown creasing her usually smooth forehead. What is that noise? She asked, a new tremor in her voice, her hand instinctively going to the microphone switch, as if to call someone, though, who Alex couldn't imagine. Abernathy, perhaps, to complain about a noise disturbance. That, Alex said, a grim, terrible satisfaction threading through his overwhelming terror, is the sound of your protocol, your precious rules, and Mr. Abernathy's authority becoming utterly and irrevocably irrelevant. The thumping grew louder, closer, a deep, resonant whoomp, whoomp, whoomp that vibrated through the ground, through the very soles of Alex's shoes. It rattled the windows in the gatehouse. Heads started turning in the nearby opulent houses. Lights flicked on. Mr. Harold Abernathy himself, roused by the escalating commotion, appeared on his expansive veranda in a silk paisley dressing gown, his face a mask of sleepy patrician indignation. His gaze followed Deirdre's upwards towards the source of the intrusive, order-shattering sound, and his jaw, already slack with irritation, dropped. Angel 1, sleek and powerful in its distinctive Aeromed rescue livery, crested the tall, perfectly sculpted cypress trees that lined the perimeter of Serene pines. Its landing lights and powerful searchlight cut brilliant sweeping swathes through the deepening twilight, momentarily blinding onlookers. It banked sharply, not towards Alex's property as Deirdre, and perhaps even the paramedics, might have momentarily assumed, but making a direct, unmistakable beeline for the Abernathys' expansive, floodlit central lawn. The lawn that housed the legendary award-winning Rose Garden, a source of immense, almost fanatical pride for Mrs. Abernathy, and universally acknowledged as the jewel in Serene Pine's meticulously polished horticultural crown. He wouldn't, Deirdre whispered, her voice barely audible above the rising crescendo of the rotors, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and dawning horror. He can't. Oh, he would, Alex breathed a raw, almost savage triumph, momentarily eclipsing his fear. He watched transfixed as the helicopter began its controlled but rapid descent. Its powerful rotor wash, a miniature hurricane, flattened the prize-winning Serene sunset, climbing roses, against their trellises, sending a blizzard of pink crimson and apricot petals into the air like macabre confetti. The carefully sculpted topiary swans that flanked the garden path, symbols of Serene pines, contrived elegance, wobbled precariously, then keeled over with a sigh of displaced earth, as if bowing in abject submission to a new, more brutal authority. Mr. Abernathy was now shouting his arms, flailing like a scarecrow in a gale, his face turning a shade of apoplectic purple. But his words, no doubt threats and condemnations, were utterly lost in the deafening roar of the turbines. The EC-145 settled onto the ruined lawn with a final decisive thump, its skids grinding into what was once pristine turf, and now resembled a plowed field. Its blades still spinning at a reduced but still formidable speed, kicked up a cyclone of topsoil shredded leaves, mangled prize blooms, and the vanquished floral ambitions of an entire community. The large side door of the helicopter slid open with practiced speed, and Alex's medevac team, 2 highly skilled flight paramedics he'd trained himself, jumped out. Their movements were crisp, efficient, their faces grimly determined as they took in the scene, the stalled county ambulance at the gate, Alex's desperate stance, the opulent chaos of their landing zone. "The gate, Deirdre!" Alex bellowed, his voice amplified by the unique acoustics of the situation, somehow cutting through the din. "Open it now, or they'll come through it, or over it, your choice." This time, Deirdre didn't hesitate, didn't consult her rulebook, didn't even glance towards the apoplectic figure of her employer. Her face was ashen, her carefully constructed composure utterly shattered, replaced by naked fear. She fumbled with the controls, her manicured nails scrabbling at the panel and the ornate wrought iron gates of Serene Pines, finally, belatedly, with a reluctant groan, swung open. The local paramedics, Chen and his partner jump kits already in hand, didn't need a second invitation. They sprinted through the now open gateway, racing towards Alex's house. Simultaneously, Alex's own Aeromed team, having effortlessly vaulted the Abernathy's low and now partially flattened ornamental box hedge, arrived at his front door just seconds behind them. Clara, tear-streaked hair plastered to her forehead, her body trembling with exhaustion and terror, stumbled back as the four paramedics converged on Lily's small, still form on the living room floor. The scene in the usually pristine living room was one of controlled, desperate chaos. Oxygen masks, intubation equipment laid out, IV lines being prepped. Voices calm and professional, despite the undercurrent of extreme urgency, barked out readings requests for equipment medication dosages. No pulse-starting compressions. Airways tight, can't see the cords. Epi 1 milligram. Alex watched his own medical training a double-edged sword, forcing him to understand every critical nuance, every terrifying possibility, every subtle sign that Lily might be slipping further away. But he also saw the skill, the seamless teamwork, the unwavering dedication. These were his people. This was what they did. This was what he did. He forced himself to step back, to let them work the hardest act of restraint he'd ever performed. Within minutes, that felt like an eternity carved out of his own heart, Lily was stabilized enough for transport. An endotracheal tube secured an IV line delivering life-saving drugs, her small chest rising and falling with the rhythmic sigh of the portable ventilator. The flight crew, with practiced efficiency, packaged her onto a pediatric vacuum stretcher. "We're taking her to County General's PICU," the lead flight medic, a woman named Sarah, whose competence Alex trusted, implicitly said to him. "They're expecting us. Dr. Ramirez is on. You riding with Alex?" Alex could only nod, his throat too tight, too raw for words. He found Clara's hand, squeezed it hard. "I'll call you from the chopper from the hospital, as soon as I know anything more." Her eyes were wide, still reflecting the terror, but a tiny, fragile glimmer of hope had begun to kindle within them. As they carried Lily towards the waiting helicopter, a procession of grim-faced medics and one utterly focused father, they moved past the stunned, gaping faces of his neighbors who had begun to emerge from their homes, drawn by the unprecedented commotion. They passed a sputtering, puce-faced, and utterly apoplectic Mr. Abernathy, who was now being physically restrained by his equally horrified but more practical wife, her face a mask of mortification. Alex paused for a brief, deliberate moment. He looked directly at Deirdre, who cringed under his unwavering gaze, looking small and insignificant beside the massive, imposing gate. He then let his eyes sweep over the scene of utter devastation that was once the Abernathy's prize-winning rose garden, now a swath of muddy destruction, churned earth, and shredded petals, all bathed in the relentless pulsating wash of Angel One's rotors. "Send the bill for the roses to my attorney," Alex said, his voice surprisingly calm, carrying easily over the idling turbines. "His name is Mark Sterling. You'll find him in the phone book. He'll be expecting your call. Along with the bill, please include estimates for the psychological trauma inflicted upon your petunias and the emotional distress suffered by your topiary. I'm sure he'll want to compare it with our claim for the endangerment of a minor willful obstruction of emergency services and gross criminally actionable negligence. I believe County EMS, who, as you know, have a live stream of this entire debacle, will also have a few pointed questions for your HOA, as will the FAA and possibly the DA's office." He then climbed into the helicopter, settling beside Lily, his hand resting gently on her blanketed form. As Angel One lifted off the powerful downdraft, delivering a final contemptuous blast to the ruined garden and the assembled onlookers, Alex looked down. He saw the flashing lights of the now redundant county ambulance, its crew now assisting his own team, their faces a mixture of shock and grudging admiration. He saw the small, angry, fist-shaking figure of Mr. Abernathy receding rapidly. He saw the dawning horror, and perhaps a grudging understanding, on the faces of the Serene Pines residents clustered at a safe distance. Then he looked at Lily. Her small chest rose and fell with the steady rhythm of the ventilator. Her face, though pale and still seemed more peaceful. That was all that mattered. The battle was far from over, he knew. The legal and social repercussions would be immense. But this crucial, desperate engagement had been won. The Roses, quite frankly, could go to hell. The flight to County General was tense, filled with the quiet hum of machinery and the clipped professional exchange of medical jargon between his crew. Alex, watching the monitors, listening to their calm competence, felt a fraction of the glacial ice around his heart begin to thaw. Once they landed on the hospital roof, and Lily was swiftly, expertly transferred to the waiting pediatric intensive care team, he finally allowed himself to take a deep, shuddering breath. Clara arrived minutes later, driven by a neighbor, her face etched with lines of profound worry, but also now a tangible sliver of hope. They stood together, hands clasped tightly, watching their daughter through the sterile glass of the PICU, a tiny figure amidst a forest of tubes and machines. The call from his lawyer, Mark Sterling, came the next morning as Alex sat by Lily's bedside, holding her small, limp hand. Alex. Mark's voice was a familiar dry mixture of amusement, exasperation, and professional admiration. You, my friend, certainly know how to make an entrance. Or should I say a landing? The HOA is, to put it mildly, apoplectic. Incandescent with rage might be more accurate. Abernathy is threatening lawsuits for everything from trespassing and felony vandalism to emotional distress over his brutally murdered heritage roses. He's also claiming your helicopter caused structural damage to his prize koi pond, though how I'm not entirely sure. The live stream, by the way, is already the stuff of legend in emergency services circles. County EMS has formally lodged a complaint against Serene Pines HOA for obstruction of emergency services, and the county fire marshal is launching an investigation into the gate incident as a major public safety violation. Apparently, your hostile private security quote is getting a lot of airtime. Good, Alex said, his voice hoarse from lack of sleep and the previous day's shouting. Lily. That was the only question that mattered. She's responding to treatment, Alex. The PICU team is incredible. Still critical, definitely, but the doctors are cautiously optimistic. Said the immediate aggressive intervention in the field and your unorthodox extraction likely made all the difference. The next 24 to 48 hours are crucial, but she's fighting. Relief, immense and overwhelming, washed over Alex, so potent it made him dizzy. He closed his eyes, a silent prayer of thanks escaping his lips. The bill for the flight, Mark. Send it directly to the Serene Pines Homeowners Association of Personal Attention, Mr. Harold Abernathy, President. Itemize everything: the fuel, the crew, hours, the emergency rapid deployment, surcharge, the wear and tear on the aircraft from an off-piste landing. And add a separate line item, let's call it horticultural debris removal and landscape reconceptualization consultation fee. Make it hurt. Mark chuckled, a dry, rustling sound. Consider it done with pleasure. They've called an emergency HOA meeting for tonight. I suspect your name and your helicopter will be the primary, if not sole, topic of conversation. You want me there? I can clear my schedule. No, Alex said, a new resolve hardening his voice. He looked at Lily at the faint flutter of her eyelashes. No, Clara and I will go. We have a few things to say. It's time the residents of Serene Pines understood exactly what their precious suffocating rules almost cost us, and what they will cost them if things don't change fundamentally. The Serene Pines Community Hall, usually reserved for sedate bridge tournaments and sparsely attended board meetings, was packed to the rafters. The atmosphere was electric, a palpable, volatile mixture of outrage, fear, morbid curiosity, and for some, a grudging, fascinated respect for the man who had dared to land a medical helicopter in Harold Abernathy's sacred roses. Mr. Abernathy, his face still flushed, a deep, unhealthy puce, was attempting to gavel the meeting to order, but his frantic hammering was all but drowned out by the angry, anxious murmurs rippling through the crowd. Deirdre McMillan was conspicuously absent. Rumor had it she'd been summarily suspended pending a full investigation, though Abernathy, in a pre-meeting huddle Alex had glimpsed, had been heard defending her actions as following established board-approved protocols. Alex and Clara walked in, and an abrupt, profound hush fell over the room. All eyes, hundreds of them, turned towards them. Alex, deliberately, was not in his usual casual attire. He wore his Aeromed rescue flight suit, the company insignia prominent on his chest, the faint scent of jet fuel still clinging to the fabric. He looked every inch the decisive, formidable commander he was. Clara, her face pale but resolute, her eyes holding a new steely strength Alex had rarely seen, walked beside him, her hand gripping his. Abernathy, seizing the momentary silence, slammed the gavel down with renewed force. Dr. Ryder, this is a closed meeting for residents in good standing. Given your wanton criminal destruction of private and community property, your reckless endangerment of this entire neighborhood. Save it, Abernathy. Alex cut him off, his voice calm but resonant, carrying easily through the hushed hall. We're here to discuss something far more important than your flower beds or your bruised ego. We're here to discuss the life of my daughter, Lily. A life which your ridiculous, criminally negligent rules enforced by your employee acting under your direct authority almost extinguished yesterday evening. He gestured to a large projection screen an associate from Aeromed had set up earlier at his request. Before we begin this discussion, I believe everyone in this room, especially those who champion the current HOA regime, should see exactly what County EMS, the Fire Department, the FAA, and indeed several local news affiliates are currently reviewing. With a click of a remote, the screen flickered to life. The chaotic, visceral scene from the night before, captured in stark, unforgiving detail by Angel One's belly cam, filled the screen. The desperate pleas at the gate. Deirdre's smug, rule-quoting refusals, her face clearly visible. The agonizing, infuriating delay. Then, the dramatic, almost cinematic arrival of the helicopter, the camera tilting wildly as it descended the shocking, undeniable footage of the Rose Garden's obliteration from above, followed by the swift professional medevac. The audio track, though noisy, clearly picked up key phrases: pediatric emergency, access denied, every second counts. The footage was raw, unedited, and utterly damning. Gasps, sharp intakes of breath, and horrified murmurs rippled through the audience. Several residents covered their mouths. Others turned to glare with open hostility at Abernathy and the other stony-faced board members seated at the front table. Mrs. Abernathy, seated in the front row, looked as though she might faint. When the footage ended, plunging the room back into a tense, charged silence, Alex spoke again, his voice quiet, but infused with an intensity that made every word land like a physical blow. My daughter Lily Ryder is 8 years old. She loves to paint, she dreams of being an astronaut. She collects sparkly rocks, and she has severe, life-threatening asthma. Yesterday she was dying, suffocating. The paramedics, the trained professionals who could have saved her vital, irretrievable minutes, were blocked by that gate, by your rules, by your employee acting under your explicit authority, Mr. Abernathy. Well, he paused, letting his words sink deep into the collective conscience of the room. I did what I had to do. What any parent in this room would pray they had the capacity to do. I have the training, I have the resources, and I have the unwavering will to move heaven, earth, and anything in between for my child. What I did to your roses, Abernathy, is aesthetic vandalism easily rectified. What your HOA, your rules almost did to my family, to my Lily, is an atrocity beyond measure. Clara stepped forward, then her voice trembling initially, but gaining strength with every word. For years, we've tolerated the petty tyrannies of this HOA, the endless nitpicking rules about things that simply do not matter in the grand scheme of a life. We've been told repeatedly that it's for maintaining property values, for upholding community standards. But I ask you, what standard is truly upheld when a child's life is valued less than a patch of meticulously manicured grass or an award-winning rose bush? What possible property value can ever compensate for a dead child, for the silence where laughter used to be? A woman in the audience. Mrs. Henderson, who lived across the street from the Ryders and whose son suffered from a severe nut allergy, stood up, tears streaming down her face. My son Ben, he has anaphylaxis. What if that had been him? What if the ambulance couldn't get through because of some transponder nonsense? I never realized. Her voice broke. Others began to speak, then a hesitant trickle that quickly became a flood. Stories of their own frustrations, their own fears, their own encounters with the HOA's overreach and its chilling lack of common sense or compassion. The tide of opinion in the room, initially perhaps divided, was now turning fast and furious against Abernathy and the increasingly isolated board. Abernathy, looking flustered and increasingly beleaguered, banged his gavel in a desperate, futile attempt to regain control. This was an isolated incident, a regrettable one, perhaps Deirdre McMillan. Well, she may have made an error in judgment under pressure, but Dr. Ryder's response was grossly disproportionate, incredibly dangerous. He landed an aircraft in a residential area without any authorization, endangering us all. Authorization. Alex laughed, a harsh, humorless sound that echoed in the silent hall. My authorization was a dying child, Abernathy. My authorization was Article 1, Section 1 of the Hippocratic Oath. First, do no harm, which by obstructing care you violated. An oath that apparently means more to me a pilot than your entire self-serving Book of Covenants means to you the man elected to protect this community. As for danger, his eyes narrowed. The only clear and present danger my daughter faced yesterday was from your stunning incompetence and your gatekeeper's blind obedience. He held up a sheaf of papers. This is the preliminary report from County EMS, citing Serene Pines HOA, for willful obstruction of emergency services with potential for criminal charges. This is a notice of impending investigation from the Federal Aviation Administration, launching an inquiry not into my actions, which are clearly covered under emergency operational provisions, but into the shocking lack of adequate emergency access protocols and dangerous gate configurations at this facility. And this, he held up a single crisp sheet of paper, is an invoice. For one emergency medical evacuation flight, full crew deployment, specialized pediatric critical care services, and associated operational costs, payable immediately to Aeromed Rescue. Consider it the first small installment on the enormous debt your HOA now owes my family. The amount on the invoice, clearly printed in large, bold figures, was visible even from the back rows. It caused another wave of shocked murmurs and a few low whistles. Furthermore, Alex continued, his voice now like cold steel, I will be pursuing all available legal avenues for the reckless endangerment of my child. And I, along with a growing consortium of concerned residents, and with the full backing of county emergency services, will be formally petitioning the county commissioners to mandate that all gated communities within its jurisdiction implement standardized emergency access protocols, including universal Knox box, override systems for all first responders, and mandatory certified emergency response training for all security personnel. Serene Pines Abernathy will be the test case, the shining example of what not to do. The meeting predictably dissolved into chaos. Shouts for Abernathy's immediate resignation, for the entire board to step down. Angry, fearful questions about liability, about skyrocketing insurance premiums, about the tarnished reputation and uncertain future of their supposedly serene community. In the end, the downfall was swift and brutal. Abernathy and the entire HOA board resigned en masse by the end of the week, facing overwhelming public pressure, the threat of crippling personal and HOA lawsuits, and open revolt from the residents. Deirdre McMillan was quietly fired. Her subsequent attempts to sue for wrongful dismissal unceremoniously laughed out of court when Alex's lawyer presented the belly cam footage and her own damning incident report as evidence. An interim committee headed by a visibly shaken but resolute Mrs. Henderson and several other more reasonable, compassionate residents took over the reins of the HOA. One of their first official acts was to issue a formal public apology to the Ryder family and to authorize payment of the Aeromed Rescue invoice in full without contest. They also immediately began the process of overhauling the emergency access protocols, working closely and humbly with local EMS and fire departments to install a universal Knox box system, revise gate operations, and ensure all current and future security personnel received comprehensive, certified emergency response training. The infamous Abernathy Rose Garden was quietly and unceremoniously replanted, not with fragile, prize-winning hybrids demanding constant, expensive upkeep, but with hardy, resilient native plants and wildflowers, a subtle, unspoken acknowledgement of a new, more grounded, and less superficial reality in Serene Pines. Lily made a full and complete recovery. The raw terror of that night slowly faded from her young mind, replaced by the wide-eyed wonder of having ridden in her daddy's super-cool rescue helicopter. Bei Tao. She drew countless pictures of Angel One, always with a smiling stick figure of herself waving from the window, surrounded by a flurry of what she called flower snow. Alex Ryder became a reluctant, somewhat bewildered local legend. The helicopter dad, the man who took on the HOA and won not with lawyers and petitions, though those certainly followed, but with decisive action, a rescue chopper, and an unshakable primal will to protect his child. He hadn't sought the confrontation, had actively tried to avoid such conflicts for years, but he hadn't shirked it when it was thrust upon him with such life-or-death stakes. Serene Pines Luxury Estates was still, by all outward appearances, a beautiful, desirable place to live. But it was a different place now, quieter perhaps in its social pronouncements, less obsessed with superficial perfection and the relentless policing of its residents, more acutely, sometimes painfully aware of the fragile, precious, and often messy human lives unfolding behind its meticulously manicured facades. Sometimes, when Alex was home standing on his own deck, he'd look out towards the Abernathy's replanted garden. A much humbler, more natural, and strangely more beautiful affair now. A small, almost imperceptible smile would touch his lips. He knew the fight for common sense, for basic human decency, and compassion over petty bureaucracy was never truly finally over. But for now, at least, in their small, chastened corner of the world, a critical, life-altering lesson had been learned. A lesson delivered with the deafening roar of turbine engines, the stinging blizzard of 1,000 ruined rose petals, and the undeniable, unassailable truth that humanity, in its most desperate and determined form, trumped protocol always. And the sound of an approaching helicopter, once perhaps a symbol of disruption, could now for many in Serene Pines be the sweetest, most reassuring sound in the world. The community fundamentally changed, began to invest its considerable resources in things that truly mattered, improved emergency preparedness, community health and wellness initiatives, and fostering a genuine culture where neighbors looked out for one another. Understanding at last that the real enduring value of their homes lay not in their pristine appearance or exclusionary rules, but in the safety, well-being, and interconnectedness of the people who lived within them. Alex, though he would never wish for such a crisis to befall anyone, ever again, knew with a quiet certainty that from the ashes and churned soil of Mr. Abernathy's once prized roses, something far more valuable, far more beautiful, had finally begun to bloom.